Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be discussing Frank Herbert's Dune, and if you're anything like me, you've probably been deluged with videos for Dune in your homepage for YouTube because of Denis Villeneuve's film bringing this work more to the popular consciousness. And in a sense, people can't seem to get enough of Dune content. And I'll link in the description below, I'll link to a couple interesting channels that I think have been producing some really great Dune content. But this is not going to be speaking about the film. This review is simply going to be talking about this masterpiece that Frank Herbert put together many, many years ago, back in the 60s. I think for anyone like me who is reading it for the first time, you're struck by the world building that goes on. You've got at the end of the book, you have a glossary, right? So you have definitions explaining to you what certain words mean. However, the words are not so crazy that you couldn't necessarily get them through context. So one of the words I remember reading, Frau Feluche, the context, the way it was written into the sentence, made me guess as to what it was. It sounded like something like a caste or a place in society. I go back to the glossary, and that's what it was. So he makes it intelligible, but yet of its own world. It's a world that is familiar to us, that it's not entirely crazy for us to conceive of this world, but foreign enough to be really fascinating. And you may have experienced this if you've read Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings has almost 140 pages of appendices at the end. There's appendices at the end of this. There's the Silmarillion. There's all of this. When you're talking about world building, so Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin or Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, you're talking about someone who's taken the time to create languages, to create dynasties. And in the case of Dune, almost every section, they're not exactly chapters, but there's a heading written by a fictional piece of literature from the future. So this is a recounting of something that's already happened, and you're hearing about it from this historical lens. So it's a frame of a frame of a frame. It's really, really wonderful in that sense. And so if you can get over the feeling of being overwhelmed, because I speak for myself, I definitely was. As I dug deeper and deeper, I just felt the inadequacy of my comprehension of this world grow. There's a famous Stoic line that, as the island of my knowledge grows, so does the shore of my ignorance. You can definitely apply that to Dune. The more that you experience of the book, the more you realize you don't know. If you can work through the discomfort of that and just keep going, you're going to get a lot out of it. There's no assumption that you're supposed to know everything. Herbert knows that. He knows that the reader doesn't know. And this is an example of what is known as soft science fiction. For those who don't know, hard science fiction is when there's an explanation. So, okay, we have this particular kind of light drive, and here's the mechanics of how it works scientifically. Soft science fiction, it's just asserted. This machine can do this, and that's that. And Dune is like that. We have simple assertions of technologies that exist. So there are so many themes in Dune. I struggled with what I wanted to talk about in this review because I don't want to ramble on and on. I just want to give you a snapshot, as I do in all of the reviews, of my thoughts about a book rather than recapping it. I want you to read it and just giving you little details. So I'm going to pick on one idea, which is the spice. The spice is something that is all woven all throughout this story, and it's a allegory for many things. So the three that I thought of particularly, you have oil, you have a conflict in a sandy desert region. The people who are in that region have no other resources other than this one thing the whole universe needs, apparently. So obviously, spice is analogous to oil, and Herbert is writing this even before the major oil shocks of the 70s and 80s. It's also analogous to water. You have a resource that is necessary for all of human life, and there's a question of scarcity. And whenever you're talking about scarcity, the vulnerable are going to be left out. There's a question about that. There's also one I think that's more fun today, which wasn't the case in Herbert's time, which is coffee. So coffee, if you're interested, I'll also put a link to Michael Pollan's brief book on caffeine, which I think is really interesting. Coffee is a psychoactive drug, which is grown only in certain bands, latitudinal bands around the world. And it's got such global demand that billions, maybe even more than billions, in trade revolve around this psychoactive drug, which again is totally optional. You don't need coffee to exist, but for many people, coffee enhances their lives. And so the spice can be seen as this. So, and I think that's what's interesting. The spice can be all three of these things. It could be something like oil, it could be something like water, it could be something like coffee. And it displays all of those properties. But that still sits in the background. It doesn't dominate the book. It's something that you have to think about as you're reading through all these other themes and other characters. These characters who, they're not simple cardboard cutouts. They really mean something, I think, to the reader. Especially the familial relationships, I think, between the Duke and his son and his consort. There's themes of politics. There's themes of climate change. The Fremen, who are living on Arrakis, they want to change the climate of Arrakis, and they, instead of it being a desert, they want it to have rain, and similar to a planetary experience like we have here on Earth. There's the question of AI. This is a universe in which machines that are made in the image of man have been banned. There's the question of roles in society. We're back into the Middle Ages. This is a feudal time period with emperors, dukes, barons, people in Fraufeluches in certain castes, and people know their place. And yet there's still ambition, there's still politicking. And family expectations. What is my role in society, and what does my family expect? And I think what makes Dune so good is at the heart of it is this question between free will and destiny. What am I destined to do? What have my parents expected of me? What have I been trained to do my whole life? There's a scene in Gattaca. If you haven't seen that movie, it's a wonderful movie. I'll put a link to it in the description. And there's a scene in which a genetically engineered piano player, there's a poster of him and he has 6 fingers. Why? Because his parents had made the decision to engineer him with 6 fingers to be a piano player. And at some point, you may have decided you weren't going to go down this path that was engineered for you. Not maybe in such a genetically extreme way as the parents in that fictional universe. But what does it mean to accept what has been carved for you as a path, and what does it mean to carve your own path? And I do think, at least here in the first book, we aren't given an answer. I know that there is an answer given in the future books, and I don't want to get into that now. But I think, at least as far as the first book goes, there is a question, there's an ambiguous answer to that question, which is, you can accept some of the training and some of the path that has been laid out for you and appreciate all those benefits and all those gifts. But you can also choose your own version of that, and that neither of those is the correct answer. So it's neither only correct to do what is expected of you and what you've been trained to do, nor is it necessarily correct to just strike out on your own. That doing your own thing doesn't make you right, nor does doing what is expected of you. That you have to consciously engage with the situation, with reality, with the present. And that's the fundamental question of human life, right? We are given free will. We know very often, if we have an informed conscience, what is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do. And we sometimes choose the wrong thing, or sometimes, very often, we may choose the wrong thing to do. But that framework is one I think we can all understand well, and it's at the heart of this novel. What do I do with this free will that has been given to me? What do I do with the gifts that have been given to me, with the privileges that have been given to me? What are the consequences for society at large, for myself in particular? And what does it mean to weigh the self versus the society, the individual versus the collective? And there's so many great things here. Take your time, enjoy it. I don't think you're likely to take your time. I think the way that Herbert writes, it's very compelling, and you're going to get drawn into it, and you're going to want to keep reading. But if it's your first time through, Definitely enjoy it. Take all the time you need. As I said, brief commentary on the new Denis Villeneuve film. I saw the film the first time. So here in Europe, we got it earlier than in the United States. I then read the book, and then I recently went back to see it a second time, in part because Christopher Nolan had said he'd gone back to see it a second time. So I thought, all right, I'll give it a second look as well. And it's nice sometimes when you see a film a second time, you're able to just relax and look for details. And two tiny, so one criticism and then one observation. One criticism is Hans Zimmer, I think, is too aware of being Hans Zimmer and has inserted himself into this film. And so we have a very heavy-handed sound design as part of this film, and I think that that's not great. But it is what it is. You can't change that now. And then as far as the film itself, I think that the film is an impression of Dune. It is, what I've just described to you is classically unfilmable. And many people have said over the years that Dune was unfilmable, and I agree. However, it doesn't mean that you can't highlight elements of this story and still put up something that is epic, something that is interesting, something that touches important themes. So, for example, all the themes I talked about, even if you only talked about 20% of what Dune is talking about, it would still be 10 times better than the average Marvel movie, which is basically just a copy of every movie that has come before, and they just interchange characters. That's not the case with Dune. In fact, I'm personally quite surprised that it has been as successful as it has been box office-wise, because I feel it's quite intellectual as a film. And I didn't realize that our current audience, maybe staying in from COVID for so many months, has made people more introspective, and they're willing to give movies like this a chance. But I'm very impressed that people are willing to give it a look. However, that shouldn't discourage you. The fact that it's just an impression of Dune, it's not a faithful retelling. You can't faithfully retell almost 600-page book with a glossary and appendices. I'm sorry. It took Peter Jackson 3 films and eventually 12 hours to tell a 1,000-page book. And what are we expecting Denis Villeneuve to do? This film only covers, I think, 350... Well, let me be exact. It covers 389 pages, not even, just around there, of this version. So 2/3 of the way through this book, and we get 2.5-hour film. So for people who want to be hard on Denis Villeneuve, I don't think he ever tried to faithfully adapt the entire book. I think what he was trying to do, he's been very successful at, which is giving you an impression of this incredible universe. And I would really encourage people to see it, but I would really encourage you to read the book first, because reading the book unlocks a number of Easter eggs and a number of insights in the film, which I certainly got. This not just because it was my second time watching it, but because I knew what everything meant now, and I knew what was missing. I knew what fictional, this is all fiction, but what parts didn't appear in the book that Villeneuve had to craft for the film. And I understood why he made those choices, and I thought they were brilliant. And what he had to omit, I also thought those were good choices. But you won't get that appreciation from just going to the film without the book. So as usual, read the book to get a deeper appreciation of the film adaptation. I don't ever like to do, whenever people give this lazy commentary, the film is better, the book is better than the movie. It's just, I always say this is like comparing the opera to the poem. Like, what do they have to do with each other? They're two completely different art forms. So an adaptation is an adaptation, and you have to let it stand on its own. And I think as an adaptation, it's a astonishing triumph for Villeneuve, and I encourage everybody to give it a look. If you'd like to see other videos like this, please feel free to subscribe, hit the like button. This is something that YouTube does. AI is not permitted in the Dune universe, but it is permitted here on YouTube, so please help other people find videos like this. And if you'd like to support my work and get access to a video that I only record for my Patreons once a month, you can check out the link to my Patreon below, consider subscribing, or just sign up to send me a cup of coffee to appreciate this content. Thanks so much for your time, and I'll see you in the next video.